Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. Let's watch another video.
ICE is here. They are going door to door. They are stopping folks on the streets. They're targeting every Somali person.
The fear among the Somali community is real. Today, as of today, the future doesn't look bright.
The
Good.
Somalians should be out of here.
Yep,
They've destroyed our country.
screwing us.
The walls of the sanctuary have finally crumbled. In a lightning-fast operation that caught local officials off guard, federal agents just turned Minnesota into ground zero for a national crackdown. And this is only the beginning of a much larger multi-billion-dollar exposure. The atmosphere in Minneapolis changed in an instant. It started with whispers, then panicked phone calls, and finally the sight of tactical vests on the streets. The message was clear. ICE is here. They weren't just standing at the perimeter. They were going door to door. They were active in the heart of the community. In the Somali neighborhoods of the Twin Cities, the fear became visceral. Some local activists claimed the operations were indiscriminate, suggesting that every Somali person was a target.
They're targeting every Somali person.
But as the dust settled, a much more clinical and calculated reality emerged. This wasn't a random sweep of a neighborhood. This was the opening salvo of Operation Metro Surge, a federal maneuver designed to break through years of political resistance and stalled enforcement. Minnesota is home to the largest Somali American population in the country. Roughly 74,000 people call this state home. For years, this community has been at the center of a heated debate over integration, local policing, and federal oversight. But when 100 federal agents descended on areas near the Caramel Mall, it wasn't a debate anymore. It was an execution of the law. If you want to understand the real stories behind these national headlines, make sure to subscribe to the channel right now and hit the bell icon. Let's look at the numbers that started this firestorm. ICE successfully apprehended 19 Somali suspects in a high-traffic area near a major Minnesota mall. To the casual observer, it looked like a sudden raid. But in the world of federal law enforcement, there is no such thing as a sudden raid. Behind every one of those 19 arrests sat a mountain of paperwork. We're talking about finalized deportation orders, cases where the person had already gone through the immigration court system, exhausted every single appeal, and been legally ordered to leave the United States. These weren't undocumented individuals in the vague sense. These were people the legal system had already checked out on. Why were they still walking the streets of Minneapolis? The answer lies in the breakdown of the system over the last several years. Under previous administration guidelines, federal agencies were often restricted in how and where they could pick up targets. They relied on local cooperation, a system that has been completely dismantled in the Twin Cities. The rhetoric surrounding these arrests often focuses on the vulnerability of the community, but the federal records tell a darker story. Among those flagged were individuals with histories that would shock the average citizen. We aren't just talking about paperwork errors. We are talking about heinous crimes, rapists, murderers, kidnappers, and sexual predators. For years, these individuals were able to remain in the country because of policies that shifted the burden of removal. If a local jail won't hold a criminal for ICE, and a local police department won't notify federal agents of a release, that person simply walks back into the neighborhood. In Minnesota, this created a backlog of thousands of individuals who were on paper for deportation, but in practice free to move.
What's your name? What's your name? What's your name? What's your name? What's your name?
Transparency in our justice system is something we all deserve to see. If you agree, take a second to hit that like button. It helps us keep bringing these deep dives to you. To understand why things got so violent during these arrests, we have to talk about the sanctuary trap. In a standard jurisdiction, immigration enforcement is actually quite boring. It's a matter of administrative handoffs. A person gets arrested for a local crime, their fingerprints hit a federal database. ICE places a detainer on them, and when their local jail time is up, they are handed over to federal custody. It's quiet, it's safe, and it happens behind closed doors. But in a sanctuary city like Minneapolis, that low-friction path is blocked. Local officials have essentially forbidden their staff from cooperating with ICE. Border Czar Tom Homan has been very vocal about this. When you remove the ability to do a safe handoff at a jail, you force agents to go into the community. This means agents have to conduct surveillance on homes, workplaces, and commercial.
What they were hoping is that the feds wouldn't come in and do all these arrests. And that's why they're not handing over these illegals to the feds. They thought the feds wouldn't have any balls. Apparently they got wrong. They got it wrong.
We're going to do the same thing in the Twin Cities we've done across the nation. We're going to focus on those illegal alien public safety threats in these cities.
It puts the agents at risk, it puts the suspect at risk, and it puts the public at risk. When ICE showed up at the Caramel Mall, they weren't looking for a confrontation. They were looking for the suspects they were barred from picking up at the county jail. What happened next was a textbook example of how local policy can lead to physical chaos.
but it would take one agent to arrest one bad guy in a county jail.
The moment the ICE jackets were spotted, an informal but highly organized alert system went off. Whistles were blown. Social media pings went out. Within minutes, crowds began to swell. This wasn't just a peaceful protest. It was active interference. Agents were surrounded. They were shoved. People began throwing snowballs and debris at federal officers to prevent them from doing their jobs. In South Minneapolis, a 10th Street standoff saw federal officers physically boxed in by nearly 70 agitators. The situation became so dire that the federal agents, the very people local officials called invaders, had to call the Hennepin County Sheriff's Office for emergency backup. They weren't calling for help with immigration. They were calling because they were being attacked and couldn't get to their vehicles.
Tense and violent confrontation we've seen since Operation Metro Surge started 2 weeks ago.
But even when the local squads arrived, they only managed the crowd. Under sanctuary rules, they didn't lift a finger to help with the federal warrants. Now we have to look at the why behind the timing. Why did the federal government decide to make Minnesota its test case? It wasn't just about immigration orders. It was about money. Massive, staggering amounts of taxpayer money. Minnesota recently became the face of the largest pandemic-era fraud scheme in the entire country, the Feeding Our Future scandal. This involved a network of individuals who allegedly stole hundreds of millions of dollars intended to feed hungry children. But that was just the tip of the iceberg. Federal investigators, including First Assistant U.S. Attorney Joe Thompson, have since pulled back the curtain on a systemic collapse of oversight in the state. They identified 14 different Medicaid-funded categories, ranging from autism services to housing stabilization, that were being used as industrial-scale fraud machines. Since 2018, these specific programs have moved a total of $18 billion. When Thompson was asked how much of that was likely fraudulent, he didn't blink. He said a significant portion, likely half or more.
I don't make these generalizations in a hasty way, so when I say a significant amount, I'm talking in the order of half or more. When I look at the claims data and the providers, I see more red flags than I see legitimate providers.
Wow.
And overwhelmingly.
This is where the immigration crackdown and the fraud investigations merge. Federal agencies like the FBI, IRS, and ICE started noticing the same names and networks appearing in both places. Many of the shell companies used to move fraudulent Medicaid money were tied to individuals with unresolved immigration status or prior removal orders. The federal government realized that by failing to enforce immigration law, the state had inadvertently created a dark economy where billions could be moved through informal wire services and businesses sending funds overseas to places like Somalia. President Trump made this connection explicit, arguing that the failure to police the border and the failure to police the state's checkbook were one and the same. He argued that Minnesota had become a risk zone, where taxpayer money could be taken with almost zero risk of consequence. Even the most progressive residents are starting to feel the weight of this. In interviews, Minnesotans have expressed a deep sense of betrayal. One resident pointed out the absurdity of the Feeding Our Future scheme, noting that small storefronts were claiming to feed thousands of children a day, a physical impossibility that the state ignored for years. The frustration is aimed squarely at the top. While Governor Tim Walz
Feeding Our Future scammed $250 million. That is just crazy. I hope somebody goes to jail for this.
has defended the state systems, the numbers tell a different story. Payments to these fraudulent nonprofits jumped by 2,800% in a single year. Any basic accounting software should have flagged that, yet the checks kept flying out the door. For the average taxpayer in Minneapolis, watching their taxes stay high while billions are lost to fraud and the streets become a battleground for federal agents is a breaking point. As one resident put it, either you have the worst accountants in the world, or you just don't care. This story is still developing, and we're following the money trail as it leads into the higher levels of state government. Hit the like button to help us reach more people with this investigation. While the world was watching the physical arrests by ICE, a second, quieter operation was being launched by the U.S. Treasury. This is perhaps the most significant part of the crackdown. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent confirmed that his agents are now on the ground in Minnesota. They aren't looking for people. They're looking for the flow. They are auditing remittance businesses, tracking wire transfers, and reclassifying entire nonprofit ecosystems as high risk. By merging immigration enforcement with financial scrutiny, the federal government is effectively putting Minnesota in.
I'd like to see how many of these Somalis file taxes every year. I mean, that's a requirement in the U.S. I want to see if they at least follow that law.
To receivership when it comes to oversight. They are no longer trusting the state to police itself. They are following the money, and that trail is leading back to some very uncomfortable places for local politicians. Operation Metro Surge was not a one-time event. It was a proof of concept. It showed that the federal government can and will bypass local sanctuary policies to execute its warrants. It also showed that they are willing to use the full weight of the Treasury to choke off the financial incentives that often drive illegal immigration and systemic fraud. The warning shot has been fired. If you are in a city that refuses to cooperate with federal law, the Minnesota model is what you can expect. Louder
Awesome.
enforcement, more agents, and a microscopic look at where your taxpayer dollars are actually going. The question isn't just about who was arrested at the mall last week. The question is, what happens when the Treasury finishes its audit? When the billion...
Excellent. They're doing a good job. I hope they finish this as soon as possible, just so they don't deal with these people anymore. I hope they put them on the fast track to ship them back out. I hear 2.5 million have been taken out. We got a long ways to go, but it's doable. See you on the next one. Please like, subscribe, share, and hit the bell. Thanks. Bye.